quotes, so we can do something like this, double quotes. And that will also work. Let's go ahead and save and run that just to see our output. So there you go, you have hello world, double quotes. So we see they both kind of act similarly. We already know that we can have single quotes. The other thing that we can do is something like this. So we can say print, and then we can do what's known as concatenation. So we can do something like this, concatenate plus, and then TION, so for concatenation. And what concatenation is going to do is going to add these two things together. Now there's two ways that you can put things together. This is the first with this plus sign. So we can save and run that again, and we see that concatenation actually put these two things together. So it looks like it's all one, but obviously in the program it was not. But we can also do something like this. So we can do hello, and then another way you can join things is with a comma there. And if we save and run that, we'll notice a slight difference where hello there actually came with a bit of a space. And that space is because we used a comma. Now, why might the developers of Python decide that there's two ways to put things together, plus and a comma, and the comma just is a space? Like, why not just add the space ourselves if we wanted it? Well, the reason for this is actually not for strings at all. The purpose is for if we want to combine strings and something like integers. So the following would be an example of why. So we would say something like I and comma 5, let's say. Meaningless, but let's go ahead and run it. And we see the output here is I am 5. But what if we, instead of this comma, tried to use a plus? Now we're also going to see the scripting language, line by line characteristic of Python, because everything up to this point here is going to work, but this will fail. So anyways, let's go ahead and run that. I am plus 5, and we see that we can't convert an object to a string implicitly. Basically what it's saying is you can't add integers to strings. That's pretty much it. And actually what it actually tries to do here is add a string to a string, because it started with a string, and I found it could not do that. But what if we did something like this? 5 plus I am, like that, we would get a different one, a different error, right? Because initially it was trying to call a string as an int, or an int as a string, and this time it said that we can't add a string to an int using, the addition. Now, I know that might feel like there's a lot of rules already, but we actually have a few more that we have to cover. The next thing that we need to know is how do we add something like the following? Let's say we wanted to say I'm 5, right? Since we're apparently fans of I5, we'll say like this, I'm 5. Well, obviously that's not going to work out, because what we've attempted to use as an apostrophe, we can't, because it's thinking at it as some sort of closing quote, and then we've got an open quote here. Obviously this isn't going to work. It's going to say invalid syntax because we've got this random floating unclosed stuff here, and then a random M that makes no sense. So how do we get around this sort of scenario? Well, there's actually 3 ways that we can handle this. The first is with an escape character, which is the backslash, which is the key that's right above your enter key. So, for example, the backslash is an escaped character. And what it's going to do for you is any character that you add this escaped character before, it's going to escape from the characteristic of that character. So in this sense, this is actually, it has a characteristic of beginning and ending strings, where if we put this backslash here, this escaped character here, it takes away that characteristic and just treats it like an ASCII character. So we can run this. Oops, we still left this one. Let's get rid of that. And in fact, let's clear away all of these just so we're back, just simplistic here. Now we see I'm 5, and it was able to print that. So that's the first way that we can handle this. The second way that we can handle this is instead of having single quotes here on the outside, we can make these double quotes like this. And now these double quotes initiate this whole sort of statement, right? And then the single quote is treated like a single quote and not the beginning or end of a string. So we can run that, and it says, I'm 5. Now the third way is a little less conventional, and there's really no great reason for it unless you wanted to quote somebody. So for example, let's say you didn't want to use escaped characters, and instead of I'm 5, you wanted to say, he said, and instead of single quotes, instead of like hi, like that, using single quotes, you wanted to use double quotes. Now we see that we're having trouble. Well, we can actually get around this as well, using a very similar practice, and that was as the second option, and we can just use single quotes to encase double quotes, and we can see he said hi in double quotes. So those are 3 ways that we can get around the whole issue of quotes and all of that. And another thing to keep in mind with the escaped character, now that we've taught the escaped character, we might not cover it too much more in these basics, but the escaped character is often the character used in file paths. And so later on, when we specify a certain path to a file, generally Windows displays file paths like this, C:\\, let's say users, blah, 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 blah. You have to be very careful because it's going to use that backslash, and you can see that this backslash will escape characters, and sometimes it causes a lot of trouble. So you can either fix that with double backslashes, or you can just change the backslashes to forward slashes. So that's going to conclude this chapter, and in the next chapter we're going to be talking about numbers, ints, and floats, so stay tuned for that. We're able to do basically all the operations, so to cover them, we could do +1